Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this very exciting event, Men, the Menopause and Allyship. It's not just a female issue. My name is Neil Hudson-Basing and I'm the Corporate Events Manager at London South Bank University. And before we get started, I just have some virtual housekeeping that I'd like to take you through, starting with a short statement on respect and dignity. Everyone speaking at or attending an LSBU event, whether in person or virtually, should be treated with respect, dignity, and courtesy. LSBU operates an environment built on equality, inclusion, and acceptance. We value contributions, feedback, and comments, and wish to create a space for sharing, learning, celebrating, and bringing communities together. LSBU does not tolerate any form of bullying, abuse, harassment, or discrimination. Inappropriate behaviour, including behaviour that potentially impacts or contradicts LSBU's reputation and values, will be treated seriously and acted upon. Anyone exhibiting any example of this behaviour will also be removed from the webinar. We want our events to be an enjoyable, safe, and warm experience for all. Thank you for adhering to these guidelines. I'm really excited today to be joined by our panel on screen. We have Ruth Devlin, founder of Let's Talk Menopause, Professor Bill Leahy from Brunel University, and my colleagues, Professor Calvin Morley and Professor Tony Moss from London South Bank University. So I'm going to be handing over to Tony shortly to do our intro, but just to take you through the Zoom functionality first, it's fantastic to see people making use of the chat box. Please continue to do so to enable networking and to help us break down the virtual wall that we're all experiencing at the moment. It's fantastic to see people popping in what they're hoping to get out of the event so far. Please share your thoughts and comments on Twitter too, and I'm about to pop some details in the chat box for you to do that. There's also the Q&A box. Please distinguish between the Q&A box and the chat box so that we don't lose your questions in the chat box. You'll also notice in the Q&A box that I've enabled the upvote function. So you can click on the thumbs up symbol to boost the questions that you most want answered to the top, and we'll get round to those shortly after today's talks and presentations. These events are kind of like part of an ongoing series of events focusing on the menopause in the workplace, but also generally. Our last set of events focusing on the menopause were held to coincide with International Women's Day, where the theme was Choose to Challenge. We chose to challenge the taboo surrounding the menopause. But one thing that really stuck out during those events was the lack of male attendees. So we decided that men, the menopause and allyship would be the focus of this event series. But do stay tuned for our ongoing events because we're hoping to deliver more over the coming months. Without further ado, I'd like to hand over to my colleague, Professor Tony Moss, for our introduction.
That's great. Thanks very much, Neil, and thanks for the invite to sort of give a quick opening spiel, as it were, to the beginning of this session. And I'm really pleased that both of the series of events of this kind that Neil and his team have organised, because I think it provides a really useful opportunity for colleagues to engage and think about and have opportunities for sort of open discussions about different issues. But I was particularly pleased, and also at the time I think sort of slightly perplexed is the wrong word, but a little bit thrown, to be honest, at being asked to come and be involved in this discussion. And I think the reason for it was partly when I started to think about what I knew about the menopause. I realised that most of what I know is sort of a caricature driven from kind of jokes and offhand comments in the media, and also from sort of friends, family and colleagues and so on. And it struck me as an area that although I in my own practice, professionally and personally, feel like I'm really committed to sort of inclusivity and so on, this feels like an area that I've just got a massive knowledge gap, and weirdly had never really considered that I had a knowledge gap really until Neil got in contact and said we've got this event running. So the main thing that I'm really sort of hoping to get from this, and I hope that others do as well, is to increase our kind of knowledge, and also feel that if it's an area that feels taboo or that we can't talk about, particularly as men in the workplace, that this provides that sort of opportunity. And so yeah, I've got nothing kind of expert to add, as it were, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from our keynote, Ruth, and then from our male allies, Calvin and Bill, and hopefully at the end try to sort of muster some meaningful closing remarks that I've also been asked to offer as well. But yeah, just to thank everyone again for their contributions to the session, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what colleagues have to say. And so I think first over is to Ruth.
Hello there. Shall I just launch in, Neil? Is that all right?
Go
Yeah,
for
carry
it.
on. Okay, right. I'm just going to share my screen. Hopefully technology will work. Here we go. There we go. Can we all see that, gentlemen? Is that all right? It's swirling away. There we go. Okay. Can you see those slides, Neil? Is that all right? Yep, nodding away furiously. Okay. Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. And before I start, I just want to say that I don't presume to know what every man is thinking. Obviously, I'm a woman and I wouldn't presume to know at all what every man is thinking. And likewise, we can't presume to know what every woman is experiencing going through this transitional period, because everybody has their own experience of any health issue. So that's just one point to point out. And also to say that, you know, when I started writing my book, I decided, well, I have no idea what men really think. So I sent out a simple questionnaire to various colleagues, relations, friends from all walks of life to get their views. And first of all, I was very surprised at the speed of those responses to the questions and also the quality of the responses. And they were sent particularly to men who give me very honest and direct answers. So I was very pleased with the results, but also all of them without fail said that they wanted more information. They wanted it to just be the basic facts and not to have any fluffy bits and to have some hyperlinks. So hopefully within 20 minutes, I'll be able to give you a good overview. So in a turbocharged session just now. So, okay, what men need and want to know about the menopause. Now, those two words, need and want, what they want to know is very different to what they need to know. And what they need to know is everything that women need to know as well. So first of all, I just thought I'd have a few statistics up. Everybody likes a few stats. I've just selected these off the British Menopause Society website. You can go on there, anybody can go on there and download some really interesting statistics. I've just selected a couple for today. Likewise, you could go onto the Women's Health Concern website, which is the patient arm of the British Menopause Society. So just, you know, the key ones here, 45% of women say their menopausal symptoms have had a negative impact on their work. That's very commonly heard. And then this one here, 47% who have needed to take a day off work due to menopausal symptoms wouldn't tell their employer the real reason. This is extremely common, even after so much awareness has been raised over the last couple of years in lots of different organisations and within organisations as well. 23% feel more isolated and 38% of partners feel helpless. So let's see how we can help that within the workplace. So how does menopause affect you within the workplace? Well, we're an aging workforce. First of all, we weren't designed to live this long. Back in the 1900s, our life expectancy as women was around 59 years, and we used to menopause later at the age of about 57. Thankfully, we now live to about 83 on average, and we menopause a lot earlier. Around the average age is around 51. But we previously, in the early 1900s, we might have just been getting towards those perimenopausal symptoms and then would have popped our clogs and we wouldn't have had to experience all these symptoms. But nowadays, we are predominantly still within the workplace as we go through this transitional period, which means that you can experience difficulties coping with previously manageable workload, lots of different symptoms, which we'll go into in a minute. But these symptoms can cause embarrassment. So take hot flushes, for instance. Some people's experience of a hot flush is a warm glow. Other people, they can literally be dripping in sweat within 2 or 3 minutes and looking like they just walked off a squash court. So that can cause extreme embarrassments for some women. Likewise, if you have problems with menstrual bleeding, some people, their periods just fizzle out. Other people, they get what's termed as flooding. And if you flood, you flood. If you're back within the workplace, you can't move off a seat if you're in a meeting. It's extraordinarily embarrassing. And it's good to know that these things can happen if you're a man within the workplace, so then you can empathise and you can help support women through this time. So lots of different symptoms accumulated together can affect women to do their job effectively. And also it can be, sometimes it can be their individual perception of how they are coping with their workload. It can be a bit like that swan analogy. Externally, they're giving this view that they're coping very, very well, and they are still coping with their workload, but it's, you know, underneath they're pedaling furiously underneath. But some people, it does impact on how they cope with their workload. And some people might find the need to change roles within their organisation to be able to cope with their symptoms. They also need support with that. And then, unfortunately, as I said before, people do start taking time off work due to symptoms. Things like if you're experiencing night sweats throughout the night, you're having interrupted sleep. You know, maybe some of the psychological, emotional symptoms are really impacting on how you're coping at work. Loss of memory, loss of concentration, that can really impact on how you operate at work. So taking time off work is a big one. And, you know, the key is to open lines of communication and make sure that this proportion of staff, that they feel valued, because essentially at the end of the day, you want to retain this workforce. It's a valuable workforce. You need to retain them and you need to support them going through this transitional period. But unfortunately, some people end up not feeling able to have that conversation with managers, with HR, with occupational health, and they end up taking early retirement. So how can management help, and how can you help support through this transitional period? So definitely acknowledge the menopause as a long-term health condition. So Neil is doing a fantastic job about raising awareness and putting on events like this for the LSBU. So absolutely brilliant. You already have a menopause policy, which is fantastic. But definitely within any organisation, provide education and information. These two things are key. You can't possibly help to support any topic, whether it's menopause, whether it's any of the women's health conditions, if you're not educated and informed. You don't have to be a menopause expert. You just have to know the different symptoms that could rear their ugly heads. Okay, and that point there on, you know, not just focusing on the menopause. Women, there needs to be an umbrella term of women's health conditions, because lots of these different health conditions cross over each other. So, you know, menopause affects 1% of the population under the age of 40. So you need to take that into consideration as well. And lots of women can experience things like endometriosis, PMDD, premenstrual dysphoric disorder, things like that, have similar symptoms, coping and moving forward. So it's that whole umbrella of different female health conditions, including menopause, that needs to be taken on board. As with female managers, need to know about all the male conditions, prostate, things like that. So definitely be informed and educated. Don't need to be a menopause expert, but make sure you've got a key figure within that organisation, somebody who's approachable, somebody who's knowledgeable, and somebody who can relate to what people are experiencing, who's a good listener and can help signpost people and support people through this transitional period. And then maybe think about, some people have mentioned in the chat box about menopause cafes. Within an organisation, provide a safe space for people, whether you call it a menopause cafe or whether you just call it I don't know, whatever you want to call it, the support through this time of your life. Regardless of what you call it, provide a safe space for people to go, for women to go to experience other people's experience as well, and what's worked for them, thinking about coping mechanisms, things like that, but to exchange experiences and just to gain support through these safe spaces. So men from experience, you all want information, because it can affect you too. It definitely does not just affect women, because women have obviously lots of relationships. You've either got partners, husbands, you have children, you have work colleagues. So lots of men are affected, but definitely men want to help. And if men don't ally themselves to this issue, the chances of change are definitely reduced within an organisation. But I would always say, don't treat them with kid gloves, men. You know, if you're educating, you know, I was once asked to go into an organisation and give a talk, and having previously given a talk to what should have been a mixed audience, but as Neil said there, you know, not many men came along to that talk. Not many men often turn up to talks unless you're providing them with a men-only talk. And they said, okay, when you're doing this men-only session, could you maybe not mention the genitourinary symptoms, all those symptoms? I don't think they need to know about that. Well, I'm very sorry, but I think men need to know about all the symptoms, because these symptoms affect not only relationships, but they affect women throughout their lives. So just to explain, you've got estrogen receptors throughout your body, and when that estrogen declines, which causes all the symptoms, that's affecting lots of different body processes. So you might have somebody who keeps on bombing to the loo all the time. That's because the urinary side of their body is being affected. So urinary frequency, urgency, leakage. They might be, you know, the estrogen declining affects the acidity in the vagina, so you can become more prone to infections. So that might mean they're rushing to the loo for things like that. So if you don't have to talk about those symptoms as a man, absolutely not. But if you understand them, then that makes more sense, doesn't it? So don't treat men with kid gloves, definitely not. So the most common question, how on earth do I broach or bring up the topic in conversation? It's like the $1 million question, isn't it? And one size most definitely doesn't fit all, and every woman is going to react differently. So don't just lump them all into one box, but make sure you're up to speed with the basics. Really, really important that you open lines of communication. I know it can feel a bit overwhelming within the workplace with all these different women's health issues, but you know, just keep abreast of all the different ones that there are that people could experience, and make sure you have to hand support and resources and signposting. But really important down here is a subtle approach. You know, the last thing you ever want to do for a woman is saying, do you think you might be at this time of the life? Do you think you're going through the menopause? That is just an absolute no-no. You know, there's easy ways of bringing this into conversation. You could maybe just say, you know, is there anything outside of work that might be affecting your workload or might be affecting you? And that's a good lead in, something like that, rather than just going in like a bull into the china shop and mentioning the word menopause. And I think that whole word, you know, the stigmatization around the word menopause, it's much better to start thinking about it as another hormonal transitional period in a woman's life. You know, we've got puberty, when hormones are fluctuating all over the place, menstrual cycles starting to settle down, irritability. If anybody's got teenage girls, they know they can be very irrational, and they can be very forgetful. They can have migraines, they can have problems with periods, and that then sort of mirrors symptoms going through the perimenopause, doesn't it? So, you know, just think of it more as a transitional period of a woman's life, and just remember, you're not expected to be an expert. So for those more observant of you will notice that I've got an image of Jeremy Clarkson up here, and you might be thinking, why on earth have I got an image of Jeremy Clarkson? Well, he has actually written an article on the menopause. It's quite good. It's a few years ago when I was starting to write my book. My husband, who's a bit of car nut, brought this to my attention. And it was a good article. He's a very good writer, whether you like him or not. Some people love him, some of the people hate him, but he is a good writer, and he's also very amusing, and he does get to the heart of the matter. And he graciously concluded the article by saying, and I quote, that we must all respect the menopause. So it's worth a read if you like Jeremy Clarkson. But so what do men need to know? Well, anything that women need to know and want to know. They want to know, what are all the symptoms? There's over 34 different symptoms associated with the menopause. As I said before, you've got estrogen receptors throughout your body, so it affects lots of different body processes. But you're not more than likely going to get all those 34 symptoms all at once. But what you might do, it is a transitional period. You might start off with a few, and then as your hormones fluctuate more, you might pick up a few and you might drop a few. It's a constant evolving process, okay? So a lot of the time, lots of women will start in their early to mid 40s with some of the psychological, emotional symptoms. They'll be putting that down to other pressures of their life. They won't immediately start thinking at that age that they're probably going through the menopause. They don't think they're old enough to be doing that. So that, you know, we're not known as that sandwich generation for anything. We've maybe got pressures of teenage children, elderly parents working in the workplace, and it's only a few years later when we start maybe experiencing some of the other physical ones that you think, well, hang on a minute, that's why I was irritable and I was, you know, feeling angry and wasn't coping with things so well. So why are they happening? It's these two main, it's the one of the main female hormones, the estrogen declining, which causes all these symptoms. But you have to realize that there's other external contributory factors that play their role in not only how you experience the symptoms, but then how you cope with the symptoms. Really, really important. How do you cope with them and treat them? Again, this is a really important point, because with any symptom, you need to know all the different options that are available to be able to cope with that symptom. So often I hear that people have been into the GP, they've been given a prescription and then sent out again because they've only got that finite amount of time to talk to somebody. But it needs all these symptoms. There are several ways of coping with these symptoms, and it's really important to understand all the different ways to cope with symptoms. We're doing a talk in more detail on Friday where I'm speaking. So if you want to know more in-depth information, then do come on to that. Will she return back to her old self? Absolutely. You know, it might take a wee while, but once her hormones have started to balance out, estrogen declining causes an imbalance of your hormones. That's not helped by elevated stress levels. So your cortisol and your adrenaline, those hormones being elevated, that's exacerbating your symptoms. So you have to focus on trying to rebalance those hormones. And is there anything that I can do? Men often want to know. Yes, most definitely. So get under your belt a few of the basics. Just quickly whiz through these. I know, Neil, I'm tight on time. So every woman will go through the menopause. Really, really obvious statement to say, but it's a good thing to point out. Someone will go, oh, does everybody go through menopause? Well, yes. So menopause is the end of menstruation after your last menstrual period. And a little sensitivity around this area, because if you're anything like me, hanging out the flags and cracking open the Prosecco, no more periods, absolutely wonderful. Whereas some people feel it, you know, as a form of bereavement because they're not within that reproductive stage anymore. So, you know, a little bit of sensitivity around this area. Around 75% of women will experience symptoms to very, very differing degrees. 25% sail through without a care in the world. And, you know, they've got the libido intact, they've got the pelvic floors intact, they have no conception of how these symptoms are impacting women, particularly within the workplace. I've explained that symptoms are caused by your declining levels of estrogen. The average age is 51 years, but menopause can happen at any time of life. So it's really important that all the younger generations are educated as well. Don't just wait till you're around the age of 51 to educate people. So very much educate from as young as possible, because there is this 1% of the population who fall prematurely menopausal. That's under the age of 40. POI, premature ovarian insufficiency, another term for premature menopause. So, and alongside these comes additional challenges as well, like fertility and things like that. Different types of menopause. You can go into menopause spontaneously, naturally, or you can have what's called an iatrogenic menopause. So that's an overriding term for either a medical menopause, so if maybe your ovaries have become damaged due to chemotherapy or radiotherapy, or whether you've had surgery to remove your ovaries. You can then be plunged into quite an intense menopause, which can be really, really challenging. And it's that rapid decline of estrogen which creates the more severe symptoms with these types of menopause. But a whole aim is that every woman should receive holistic person-centered care. So just a few terms. If you're premenopausal, in that reproductive stage, you go through to perimenopausal stage when the estrogen levels start to decline. We'll come to that in a minute. Becoming menopausal, you can only be classed as fully menopausal when you've had 12 continual months of no bleeding, and then you go into postmenopausal years. But just quickly want to go back to that perimenopausal, that word there. A lot of women will there's a myth around this area that you have to get yourself through this stage to get to the menopause before you start going and get education, and before you start going and getting informed, or before you start going and getting treatment. Absolutely not. It doesn't matter how mild your symptoms are or whether they're severe or mild. Go and seek advice and go and seek help within this perimenopausal stage. And yes, you can have medication. Yes, you can have hormone replacement therapy in this period if you're still having your periods as well. Really, really important point to make. So we've got over 34 different symptoms. Haven't got time to go through them today, but on Friday I will do in a little bit more detail. Physical symptoms like hot flushes, night sweats, joint aches, migraines, weight gain, bloating, all these sorts of things, problems with sleep. Then you've got the psychological, emotional symptoms, some of the hardest symptoms to cope with, particularly within the workplace, because you can't see them. And it's that sense of being out of control that can be the most debilitating thing for women. So they can't control how fast their estrogen levels are declining, and it's that impact of not feeling in control with all their their emotions that can really start to impact people, particularly within the workplace. There's genitourinary symptoms, or the vaginal, vulva and urinary symptoms, long-term and rare symptoms. I won't talk too much about these, but just to mention that you do have a pelvic floor as well, gentlemen. So make sure that everybody downloads the Squeezy app. It's a series of muscles. Everybody needs to exercise. Really, really important. So I realize I'm just nearly out of time here, Neil, but just a couple more slides. So how do you cope with the symptoms? Well, you can look at all these areas. So this one is the most important to look at for anybody. If you go and see a menopause specialist or a clinician who specializes in this area, they will first and foremost start off with lifestyle choices. So that's your diet, your exercise, you know, looking at the hydration levels, looking at your caffeine levels, looking at alcohol levels, how much sleep are you getting? These play an important role on not only how you experience your symptoms, but how you manage to cope with those symptoms. You could maybe look at alternative remedies like herbs and supplements, but err with a side of caution. Always seek advice from somebody who really knows what they're talking about. They're not regulated, so always seek advice. Alternative options like cognitive behavioral therapy, it's loads of research going into that at the moment. I'll go into more detail on Friday on that. There's non-hormonal medication, and then you've got hormone replacement therapy. And definitely hormone replacement therapy, I'd just like to say, is most definitely a valid option for the majority of women. Don't be scared of hormone replacement therapy. If you want to know more about hormone replacement therapy, look on the Women's Health Concern website. There's lots of fact sheets on there. Excellent information. And don't read newspaper reports on HRT. Read reports which are written by people who know what they're talking about, clinicians who work daily in this area. So just a few useful resources. So we've got the Women's Health Concern, which is the patient arm, the British Menopause Society, fantastic fact sheets, great helpline as well. The Menopause Matters, excellent information. They also have a quarterly magazine as well, which you can subscribe to. The British Menopause Society is primarily for clinicians, but if you do want to know a little bit more, then scroll along to publications, scroll down to tools for clinicians. Great place to signpost your clinician to. Nice guidelines, we all know about nice guidelines. And then the Let's Talk My Menopause, it's just a chatty blog. This is the Squeezy app. Everybody needs to go and download for their pelvic floor. It doesn't matter what age they are. It just describes what the pelvic floor is for, how to do an exercise, gives you timed exercises, best $2.99 you'd spend. It's an NHS app. And this is the Daisy Network. Now, this is a fantastic resource for anybody who's going through premature menopause, really good resource. Likewise, the Eve Appeal, fantastic resource for anybody going through the 5 gynae cancers. Endometriosis UK speaks for itself. And then you've got HEBA-picked Menopause Within the Workplace, who I've often collaborated with and are fantastic on that side as well. So just a couple of books. There's my little book there, not to really advertise that, but just to say that these 2 books here I'll be mentioning on Friday. These 2 ladies have done enormous amounts of research in cognitive behavioral therapy and the benefits of using simple tools and coping mechanisms. And these 2 books are fantastic, very understated ladies. We've got a Professor, Myra Hunter, and a clinical specialist, clinical psychology specialist, Melanie Smith. Delightful people, but they really know the stuff, and CBT has definitely been shown to have major benefits in reducing stress levels, which then help to cope with those symptoms. And that is me, gentlemen. There we go. If I just stop sharing, there we are. Hopefully I stuck to time.
You did dead on. Thank you so much, Ruth. As Ruth has mentioned, Ruth is joining us on Friday from 12 p.m. to 1 p.m. Where we will be running a men-only Q&A session for any men. So if you are a man who wants to know more about the menopause, no topics are off limits, right, Ruth?
Absolutely none. No.
Right. So, or if you know someone who would benefit from attending, I am about to pop the link in the chat box. Over to our next speaker, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Professor Calvin Morley. We're going to hear from 2 male allies who are kind of talking about how they've supported women in the workplace, going through the menopause, covering women's health. So I'm delighted to introduce Calvin, and then we'll hear from Bill. Calvin, over to you.
Thank you. Hopefully everyone can hear me now. Sorry about that. And thank you, Ruth. I'm not sure how I'm going to follow you, but thank you for a wonderful presentation. My presentation takes, or my talk even takes a little slightly different stance. I thought I'm looking very much at the politically, socially positioned woman and women's health and how we support women going through the menopause and become allies. And I thought menopause is the end, as such, of those reproductive years that we look at, but biologically when we talk about it. But what I wanted to look at is the beginning, a little bit about how we come about a taboo of menopause and men and women's health, and men not participating and supporting women throughout the menstrual years as such. So a really potted history I want to give you is that in the history of menopause, menstruation was seen as unclean. Women were not allowed to participate in daily activities in some societies and cultures. And in some of those cultures and societies, women have had to isolate when they were having their menstrual cycle. And just to tell you a few things, it was believed that if a woman was menstruating and she prepared food, her spouse will be injured during the war and his blood will run freely out of his body. Another belief is that that menstruation, in negative ways it is that for cultures, menstrual blood had evil and harmful qualities for men. So for example, according to the Talmud, which is a Jewish sect, if a woman starting her cycle passed between two men, one of them was being condemned to die. If on the contrary, the woman was ending the menstrual cycle, both men would end up quarreling. Besides this, in some cultures, it was believed that outside of the mystical component, so we begin to see that menstruation and women's bodies and how they function was very mystical to men. And notice what I'm saying to you is always about men. Men are the ones who are affected by this, okay? So we begin to see how women are positioned in society and how women's health around menstruation is positioned in society, and they are positioned by men. So it was believed that, that menstruation contained poisonous and harmful substances. So for living beings and other things as such, so women were harmful in that respect when they were menstruating. On the other hand, there is a naturalist historian list done by Pinney and Elder, and they talked about the dangers of menstruating women. So now we begin to see in history women's health and understanding menstruation, women are now dangerous. So it was said a menstruating woman can turn wine into vinegar. They can break mirrors, they can ruin iron and leather. They can darken the skies and make the fields sterile. They can make fruit fall from trees. Women can kill bees who are menstruating, and they can make animals abort spontaneously. So a menstruating woman had, according to certain cultures and beliefs, had lots of powers, but for them, they were all negative powers. So from the beginning, we see women have been dogged by natural bodily function. We have always seen that, and remember also aligned to menstruation is hysteria. Women were taught to be hysterical. Some women were put in asylums because it's the failure of men to understand women's bodies and how women's bodies function. And this is the crux of my short 10-minute presentation today. It's the failure of men and the failure of society. So all these, beliefs and practices and these suppositions about women's health, and as I said, I'm starting with menstruation as I work my way down, are tied up in cultural practices, beliefs, and patriarchal lineage. So men have continued to dominate. So we know, but now in popular culture, if we think of menstruation, there are parties. Young girls have parties to celebrate their menstruation now. And there are festivities in some cultures around the world when a young woman starts menstruating. So we're beginning to see some positivity, and that is good. Menopause, if we move on, is the end of menstruation. And, Ruth, you handled this then. And I think I was seeing in the chat box with people asking questions about, is it one day after 12 months that you stop having your period? And there are all these little biological things that we look at how we define things. I was looking at, the television program last night, Hospital, and the obstetrician said, he said, a woman has to wait to have 3 miscarriages before he can see her or they can seek medical help in the NHS. And his answer was, his question was the same as mine. Why wait for 3? The fact that 1 happens should never be happening. It should be as such. So it's the same thing, when we look at women and we look at menstruation, we shouldn't have to wait 12 months to say, this is the end. This is the point I'm getting at. Because there are other things Ruth pulled out in her talk that, are similar that I wouldn't go over, where we look at the biological bit. So this brings me to my next point, okay? That women have always been seen, or health is seen in a biological and a biomedical context. There's a biomedical model of health. And the biomedical model of health sees us as, for example, a car. And the car is broken, we can fix it and we can repair it. And there's wear and tear, and the wear and tear is the body. So if we if we apply the biomedical model to women's health and menstruation, we begin to see it's not so much wear and tear, but it's a change and a transition. Okay, so some of the things that we have focused on in society, and you know, Ruth made it quite clear. She said, do not read those newspaper articles on menopause. You know, go to the clinicians and the people who have investigated and worked and understand this. You know, by all means, blogs of women's experiences are really good, but when you are seeking that information as a man and as an ally, you need to think of where you get your information. And we know with current social media, it's really easy to tap on your phone or your device and something pops up. And what I'm trying to get to is there's fake news, okay? There's a lot of fake news out there, so you need to really and truly understand, you know, what's real. And as you said, you know, go to the expert. So, the way women have been portrayed in society, again, when they get to menopausal age, is that there's a loss of femininity. I used the term earlier on when I started, a loss of reproduction. They're no longer fertile. And here again, we begin to see the negative aspects of menopause and how women are positioned and looked at. So we begin to see someone who has lost a lot of stuff. And again, that subconsciously devalues women. Those, you know, those things that, you know, the loss of femininity, the loss of, you know, reproductive years, such, you know, the loss of beauty, you know, you become, as we were talking earlier on, hot and sweaty flushes and all these things and how long they last. These things begin to devalue subconsciously because we use the word loss, because we use these terms to describe this transition of women's health. Okay, you know, some people use that term transition as transition into a different age group and you know, aging. And we know as a society we don't always appreciate, you know, age after 40 or 50, particularly for women. So we begin to see subconsciously how we can begin to devalue women and actually look at the roles they can play and participate in work. So my recommendation is 3 essential things we need to do. So if you think you have a backpack and you have to have your 3 essential things to become an ally, how do you become an ally for women and women's health, particularly around menopause? I'm going to give you my 3 main battery packs I'm going to have. The first one is normalize conversation. Let's not be like ancestors and olden societies and cultures where we have this mystical idea of hysteria and uncleanliness and, you know, women have these powers that are evil as such. Let's not have that. Let's normalize the conversation. And today is a great way of normalizing the conversation. So we need to look at, and I'm really happy that LSBU is providing this space on Friday. So thank you, Neil, for organizing, because men need to listen to women talk about their experience. We need to hear that. We need to hear it from them. I, as a man, can write about things, but I can't speak because I've never experienced it, okay? I can empathize, and that's great. So we need to normalize the conversation that leads to understanding, better experiences of women, and in so doing, men become allies. They can become more knowledgeable, empathetic, and understanding. So that's my first point about normalizing. My second point is understand and believe. Believe women when they say they are at menopause, okay? So if a woman is telling you, I think I'm approaching it, don't say, oh no, you're too young. Because the earlier presentation just pointed out the ages women can actually start experiencing menopause. It's like we know there's early Alzheimer's, right? We say early onset Alzheimer's and dementia. It's the same thing. We can have early onset. So believe women, understand, as I say, think of the biomedical model in some respects, that this is a transition. My third take-home point to you is, for my battery pack, is respect. Respect women. Respect women not because you want to be respected by them. So you say, oh, you know, this is a woman and I want to gain her respect. Respect women because you are a respectful man and you respect the position they're speaking from, and consider the history I've just outlined to you of how we've treated women in the past around this whole idea of menstruation and menopause, okay? So we need to look at how we become respectful of women. I mean, I can't leave without, you know, 2 further points. My title is Professor of Diversity and Social Justice. And we also need to consider the narratives of different groups of women, okay? We need to consider the narratives of Black women, particularly. Because Black women are seen in society and they're portrayed as strong Black women, they feel no pain, they're tough women, and they're not psychologically swayed. Again, earlier on in the presentation, you heard about, some people see this as the end of, this transition, it's something big that's happening to them. So don't think that because a woman is Black and she's labeled as strong, they don't feel any pain, they're tough. This has a biological effect. The change of those hormones we heard about earlier on, they have an impact on the person. So that's one area. The other area we need to consider, and I'm no expert in it, although as a nurse, I speak from a nursing platform, I work with a lot of transgender people. We need to start considering people who don't identify as women, but maybe having menopausal symptoms. I don't know the whole ins and outs, but these are the things I think when we start talking about becoming allies, particularly around diversity and respecting women, believing women, normalizing the conversation. More importantly, this has to be everyday conversation as such that we can openly speak about it as men. Finally, I would like to say, as an ally, it's not difficult to be an ally. Okay, the various models of allyship exist, and I think the first allyship model we all know about is LGBT. Sorry. And the letters go on, but I think everyone know what I mean, LGBTQ. We really and truly had a great model there we can follow. More recently, since the George Floyd Death and Black Lives Matter movement, we've looked at white allyship. And here's another example of where we look at men, how we can use those models of allyship and how men become allies to women's health, how we begin to be able to speak and support women in the workplace and not say, because as a man, I've heard these conversations and they exist. Men do say things. I think Neil is smiling at me. I have to add. Men do say that, the woman's pulling a fast one. It's not real. This is not right. I think we need to move beyond this and normalize this conversation. I'm going to end it there, Neil.
Thank you, Calvin. Brilliant. Loads of fantastic takeaway points. And the main one to sum it all up is it's not difficult to be an ally.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Bill, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Neil. Hello, everyone. Thanks for inviting me to talk about this. I feel a little bit nervous, I have to admit, talking about it. I haven't really talked about it before in a public environment. Let me take a different approach, a personal approach to my thoughts around this allyship. It was around about 2008, I think, around about that time that my wife started showing symptoms of menopause, and a number of the symptoms that have already been discussed and that we know about, sorts of hot flushes and various other ones, the foggy brain and all of that sort of thing. And when I look back on it now, it was really quite a difficult time, even though we knew as a couple it was happening, and we knew kind of what to expect. As Ruth said, it's all very, very personal and individual. But when I look back on it, the difficulty really, I suppose, was because it was happening in the context of our lives, other things happening in our lives, other things that were in some ways quite difficult. So I remember, first of all, my wife was in the middle of, she'd had a career change. She had been a clinical auditor and had decided to retrain to be a midwife. And so she was in the middle of her studies and was really struggling with the courseworks and exams and so on. Our son was having some kind of mental health issues and was having difficulties at school as well. And so it's not as though we had this perfect life and then my wife started experiencing menopause and it disrupted this perfect life. It was something that was happening in this context of other quite difficult, quite emotional, quite difficult issues to deal with, I suppose. And as well as all of that, of course, I found myself having, I wasn't just the purely understanding partner. I had a very kind of emotional response to it as well, feelings of rejection and just not fully understanding, even when it was clear and my wife was clearly explaining it. Sometimes it just wouldn't land that well. At the same time, may I add, in all of this, we decided to get a dog as well. I don't know why we did that. It just made it even more confusing and difficult. But as well, I was promoted at work and I became Dean of the Faculty of Arts at Brunel. And so there were lots of other kind of pressures like that as well. So when I do look back on it, it's quite a confusing and emotional time. And I found it hard to separate out the various things that were going on. However, we did get through it, of course. And as I say, I was promoted at the time to Dean of Faculty. And just around that same time, it was the first time I'd really started working then closely with senior women. And I don't just mean professors and so on. I mean, the faculty manager and other women like that. Many senior women who were generally quite mature women and who were experiencing, some of them, the menopause as well. And what was happening at home, in fact, it helped me understand what was happening at work with in my interactions with some of these women who were going through this as well. And I think the two experiences together, I was kind of learning as I was going along. Now, I'm a Shakespeare scholar. I had no kind of medical background, so I didn't understand the medical aspect of it all. Obviously, I read up a bit about it, and that all helped. But it was very much a taboo to talk about at work. However, over a fairly short period of time, I think I developed very good relationships with these senior women at work, informed by what was going on at home. And we found that on the basis of trust, we built up a relationship of trust. We were able individually and one-to-one to start talking through some of the issues that these women were facing. And indeed, may I add, some of the difficulties I was having in my relationship, dealing with it as well. And I suppose in many ways then I became educated around all of this on the job, as it were. And I found that really, really useful. And my approach to line management anyway, irrespective of this, is one of, I assume people are being honest and being truthful. I trust people. I expect them just to do what they do and do it as well as they can. And if they are experiencing difficulties with that, I assume that the reasons that they give for the difficulties that they're having are honest ones and are truthful ones. There's no assumption that they are in some way being dishonest. And so within that environment, then it became easier for me, and I think easier for them, to kind of deal with these issues, at least in some environments at work. Obviously, sometimes there were environments where it wasn't easy, or where the reaction was quite strong and sometimes embarrassing. But I hope that we kind of developed an environment in which we could talk about stuff, let me put it that way. And other men were drawn into those conversations. That often it was around about somebody would say, oh God, what's happening with so-and-so? She reacted in this way. And that enabled me, because I knew what was going on, to say, well, why don't you talk to her and try and understand? You know, there will be reasons for it. It won't be just bad temper or whatever. So that was quite fruitful. At the same time, what was happening in the workplace mirrored what was happening at home, in the sense that the workplace is also never a stable environment. There's always lots of change going on. We had very shortly afterwards, a very big restructure. You know, people's jobs were put at risk and all of that sort of thing. And again, the way women were feeling and whether they were experiencing the menopause was in this really unstable and difficult context. And so one has to bring a kind of really understanding mindset to that, to try and work through all of these issues together, but always keep it in mind that, you know, this is potentially going on. Women are undergoing these conditions and so on. Now, I think that led me, anyway, I hope, to a much better understanding, to the extent where I did notice yesterday on your website, Ruth, I had a look, and it talked about how what so-called wild swimming can be, you know, a good physical exercise to do. And it took me back to a colleague then about 3 years ago who, you know, was really struggling because, as it turned out, she was experiencing premature menopause. Now, experiencing it was difficult enough, but of course, she was having all sorts of difficulties with people believing her, and even medical people believing her. And it was really great to be able to talk through with her. It actually started through, she did this wild swimming, and I said, well, why would anyone do that? You know, just seems insane to me to do that. But she started talking it through, and then, you know, the conversation broadened out to the real reasons why. And it was another educational experience for me. And, you know, it felt good that she felt empowered to be able to have that discussion with me, because she obviously felt it was a supportive environment. Now, that has been, and I don't want to say that I've had a massive impact here at Brunel, but at Brunel, we launched our menopause policy. We called it Let's Pause for a Chat About Menopause. We launched it last year during the pandemic, during lockdown. I think it's great. You know, it's a really, really good policy. I think it does all the things that a good policy should do. It talks about all the potential symptoms. It talks about what people may go through. It talks about what the responsibilities are for employees, for line managers. It's a whole university policy, so it includes students, because of course we have many mature students, but also students who might be experiencing premature menopause. And it talks about what personal tutors may want to do. Generally speaking, what it talks about is educating ourselves about this and being open to have discussions about it, and then being supportive of people who are experiencing the symptoms, even when sometimes it might feel difficult to support those people. But the understanding is the main issue. And I think really, I was trying to be clever and think of 3 things I put in my power pack, Calvin, following up from your conversation. But I suppose in a way they're the same 3 as yours, really, is be aware, get educated, be supportive, and trust, really. And yeah, I think that's where I want to end my chat, Neil. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. So I'm just going to change the view so the audience can see all of us for our panel discussion. So thank you, Bill, and thank you, Calvin. Bill, off the back of yours, there's lots of positive comments in there, and I can't say it any better than Debbie said it. Thank you for sharing your personal experience and how this has helped in the workplace. Really powerful stuff, and that's been echoed by multiple people. So I have some quick questions. focusing on male allyship, and then we've got a number of questions in the Q&A box, and we'll try and work our way through as many of those. But just a question to kick us off. What prevents men from being allies and trying to understand women's issues? And anyone can jump in. Ruth, we'll come to you first.
I don't mind. Yeah, I can. Well, from my experience, and I'm not a man, obviously, but men that I've spoken to have said, you know, if an organisation puts on a mixed talk, open to men and women, lots of times men don't attend, but they're not attending for various reasons. So they're not attending because they maybe don't think that they need to know about it, or they don't care. They are most definitely in the minority, but more often than not, they're sensitive to the fact that maybe they think women wouldn't want them at the talk, so that they, you know, might feel hindered by them being there, so they might not feel so open to talk about sensitive topics. So, you know, those are two very common reasons.
Thank you.
Could I jump in?
Yeah, of course,
there?
go for it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess an obvious one, embarrassment. A lot of men will feel embarrassed. Mm-hmm. A lot of men won't turn up because they see it as a woman thing. So, you know, it's the same when we did around sexual harassment. Hardly any men turned up to them, although it's a male problem. It's a men problem. And then I suppose, you know, prejudice, really. It's as simple as that, it's a bit like, I suppose it's a bit like the Black Lives Matter thing, you know, where in this last year, we've been able to get to this point where we can say this is a white issue. You know, I mean, it's unbelievable, but a lot of white people think it's not a white issue. And I think, you know, with the menopause, it's a male issue. It affects 50%, well, 51% of the population. It affects our mothers, our daughters, our wives, our partners, our aunts. It affects all of those women around us. So I think it's a kind of educational thing, and it takes this kind of thing, you know, done a million times. That's what will make a difference and open men's minds, I think.
Thank you. Calvin, Tony, would either of you like to come in?
I mean, I echo what both my colleagues have just said, and I think it's men need to realize they're invited to the table and they can share their experience, and it's good to talk. And I think there is something in you know, in truth telling stories, and Bill, you know, your story was really truth telling, that we heard what you experienced and what you went through, and there is something about truth telling, and I think we probably have to have a little bit more truth telling cafes for men, so that they are invited and they could talk, and that they realize that their experience is valued. Because a lot of the time, men still hold the machismo that, you know, this doesn't touch me. You know, as we said earlier, it's a woman thing. So I think it's about truth telling and telling men their views are welcome at this table, and we invite them. You know, so proceed. I heard Stacey Johnson said a wonderful statement yesterday. Proceed as though you're welcome. So proceed as welcome. No one, you know, shutting you away.
I love that. Love that. Tony.
Yeah, my only thought, I think the colleagues have covered really well the sorts of reasons. One other that sprung to mind is the taboo nature of the things that sort of, you know, we often talk about as women's issues. Whether some men, and maybe I'm speaking from a sort of a personal perspective here, assume that because it's a women's issue, that women therefore know more than I do and don't really need my help. There's nothing useful I could add to the conversation because it's something I know very little about. And so that, yeah, I wonder to some extent if that could be a barrier for others. I think it is important to acknowledge, as Bill said, that there will absolutely within society, and therefore in any organisation, there will be bigoted attitudes that people actually don't think, you know, this is a thing we should be talking about, it's not appropriate. But I think at the other extreme, there may be people who would like to help, but maybe just don't think they've got anything to bring to the table.
Yeah. And I guess what today is establishing is that you actually don't have to necessarily bring anything to table, but just be at the table and listen and be aware. Thank you. How can organisations support men to better understand what women go through with the menopause? And there's events like this, and from recently talking to Henpicked, there's things like menopause accreditation and menopause modules for mental health first aiders, for example. But kind of like what more can organisations bring? And Ruth, I'll bounce that to you first.
Yeah, just what I said in my presentation, really just make sure people, are informed, that they find things, not just attend sessions like this, but that they're able to find things out for themselves. And, I mean, Bill's sharing his experience was absolutely fantastic, providing safe spaces, Calvin said, for men to share their experiences as well as women is really important. So the more knowledge and information you have on board, the better, definitely.
Thank you. Someone's just popped in the chat box. My experience is often male managers are worried about putting their foot in it in a clumsy way and making the situation work. We have a male buddy network in HMRC to help. So thank you. What behaviours can men demonstrate to show their support for women? Bill?
I think echoing Calvin really is just believe lived experience. Very often, I suppose, again, the workplace can be a highly pressurized environment. And, sometimes you have to cut people some slack, I suppose. We saw this during the pandemic, particularly at the beginning, that people were very, very anxious, and anxiety often can lead to bad decisions and bad interactions. But generally speaking, I think if you just believe people, that this is what I found in my organization. Now I'm the vice provost, and so I interact with a lot of people across the organization, and 99% of people are good people who want to do good things, and are people who want to do an excellent job. And when things are put in their way, including their own health or bad health, they really hate that. They want to do good things. So believe them when they say, I'm feeling this way and it's impacting me in this way. So I think that can really help, is if they think that they have got a culture of trust there.
Thank you. When we were researching this event, looking at kind of different male allies and things that people have said, Asif Sadiq, the head of diversity and inclusion at Adidas, said, "I am a firm believer that women don't need to be fixed. The environment they work in needs to adapt." So that kind of, I think that very much aligns with what you're saying, Bill. Lorraine pops in the chat box, "My personal experience has been that younger female managers have been far less supportive and understanding than my male managers." That comments kind of came up at the last one. Ruth, is that something that you've experienced as well?
Most definitely. And I think it ties in with anything, isn't it? If you've not experienced it yourself, sometimes you don't really can conceive how debilitating some symptoms can be. And definitely found actually in some organizations that younger male managers are more sympathetic because they know what their mothers have been through, or their aunties, or they have a little bit more of an insight into what people might be experiencing. But yeah, younger female managers can tend to be a little bit of a challenge sometimes.
Thank you. Would anyone like to add anything to that?
Neil, I just wanted to go back to the previous question, which Bill was answering. I think one of the other things we need to look at is how do we get menopause into the decision-making rooms, the rooms that then understand and make the decision that this is an agenda item. So if you were in the National Health Service, you would think, how do I get my NHS exec and non-exec directors to get this on the agenda and the board? If you're in the university, like Bill says, he's a provost, he can get that on the table. So it's another area is how do we use our own, strengths, persuasion, our own positions, and our allyship to get menopause and menopause policies and it's all the work around this. How do we get that on the boardroom? So because once it's recognized by the boardroom, it could then be channeled and funneled down. So we can have that working that way as well. So I think, and we know a lot of men sit in boardrooms. So that's why we need the allyship, okay? We need the men who sit in boardrooms to take this back and say, this is something that's important. This is something that affects our workforce. Particularly, as I said, I speak from a nursing platform, NHS workforce platform at times, and we have a lot of women who are nurses and doctors, and they go through this. So we need to really make sure that, and again, even in the academic field, you have a lot of women who are teachers and working. So we really need to get this into the boardroom and get it from there as well.
Thank you. Okay, so we are going to go over to audience Q&A just because I've seen how many questions there are in there. So I'm quite keen to tackle some of those. So there are a couple of questions around kind of a gender neutral language. What advice do you have around using gender neutral language in policies and support efforts? And what support and approach can be taken for those who experience their menopause, who don't identify as women? And this is something that we do plan to tackle. It's on our radar to look at the at kind of like advice and guidance around kind of like trans, non-binary people, and more general health such as menstruation, childbirth. But taking on gender neutral language first, and Calvin, I hope you don't mind, I'm going to come to you first on
that. Language has a lot to be blamed for, okay? I think, and we need to be very careful how we use language. How can we use it? Okay, we're beginning to speak, for those of us who are now beginning to speak about menopause and understanding it, we're only seeing it through the female lens. We need to apply that intersectional approach and lens, and that's one way, and that's how language will change. So we need, when we get other people on board, people who say, like I said to you, I work with a lot of transgender people, but I work with initial pre-operative people, post-operative, pre-op and post-op, but I don't see them when they live their life as male or female after. So I don't understand all of those things. Mine is quite, initial, but I have learned how to use language even then, I the simple things of nursing handovers and things. So I think language is important. So when we have a group together and that group can speak freely and they have that space, then we'd recognize what we need to use. And I think it is important that that's why we have pronouns on emails. People say how they want to be called, he, she, them, they, etc. So I think we need to start from that standpoint of how people identify and then work that in the policy, because the language is there. It's how we use it to our benefit.
Yeah, it's there and it's important to people. It does
Sorry?
make a difference. It's there,
Yeah.
and it's important to people. It really makes a difference. Ruth, are you happy for me to come over to you next?
Yes, no, I think Calvin summed it up very well there. I can't add anything more. Just definitely gender neutral language and just opening up the conversation. And you made a point there, Calvin, of not just seeing it through a woman's eyes. I think that's a really good important point there.
Thank you both. And as I mentioned, we will be looking at this as developing some events and activity around this later this year. Amanda comments, Ruth keeps talking about menopause. My reading as I approach this point in my life, recognizing I knew absolutely nothing, tells me that we should actually be talking about the perimenopause and the menopause only being actually one day. What is the correct terminology? Also, I read that GPs don't have to study the menopause, perimenopause in order to become doctors. Is that true?
Yeah, well, I did answer Amanda actually in the chat that menopause is generally used as an umbrella term, and the different stages, as I pointed out in the talk, are that the most symptomatic stages are perimenopause, then you become fully menopausal, and after 12 continuous months of no bleeding, and then you go into that postmenopausal stage. Where doctors are concerned, they are trying to get it into the curriculum for medics, definitely. And where I am in Scotland, they are definitely doing a lot of work on the ground, helping to educate general practitioners in particular, and we call them general practice nurses up here in Scotland. So lots of education going on there. And there's definitely a need for it. If you put any webinars on through NHS Education Scotland, they are flooded with attendees when it comes to the menopause, because they genuinely want to know and help. So lots of people don't think there's education going on, but there is.
There is. I know I think it featured in Davina's documentary recently around kind of GPs, and there's a lot going on.
Well, the RCGP put out a statement prior to that going out because they knew that GPs were going to be heavily criticised. And it's a shame because, yeah, there are some GPs who need to get up to speed with this subject, but there are some incredibly good general practitioners out there who specialise in this area. And also lots of people don't think that there's lots of research going on this. There's continual research going on with this. You just need to look at the British Menopause Society website and you'll find that as well.
Thank you. Anne pops a question in around access to menopause clinics. And I know there was something on TV recently about kind of this also being kind of like quite controversial and the lack of access. How can we increase GP awareness that all women, non-binary, intersex and trans people should have right to access? This is a popular topic. Ruth, are you happy for me to come to you?
Yeah, no, happy to go. I'll just giving everybody opportunity. I think it's a very, really common question that you come across. There aren't enough menopause clinics as such. That's just down to every individual health board nationally. It's and funding and all these sorts of things as well. But and there are menopause specialists within various areas, but again, there aren't enough of them. If you want to find your nearest menopause specialist, you can go onto the British Menopause Society website, pop in your postcode, and that will give you your nearest specialist, but they are, you know, time restricted. It's just mainly educating GP. If you do go along to, you want to go along to your general practitioner, the first thing I definitely advise is make sure you find out before you make an appointment which person is the best person to go and see, because they will have somebody in their team, hopefully, which who's more sympathetic on the women's health issues, particularly menopause. Yeah.
Thank you. So our next question is focusing on the issue of sex during the menopause. What ways can we make sex comfortable if your partner is going through the menopause? And I know this is something that we're kind of like we're talking about on Friday during Friday's men only session, Ruth. But are you happy to take on that one? And then I'll open it up.
Absolutely. It's a really good topic to tackle, and obviously affects men. So yeah, you know, as I said before, estrogen receptors throughout the body, and one area of the body where it can really have a huge impact is the vaginal, the vulva area, and that urinary tract as well. So definitely, first of all, try and have a good conversation with your partner, and explain. Communication is key. Explain how you're feeling, how it's impacting physically on you, not just emotionally as well, because emotions play a role as well. It's not just the physical side of the menopause, of menopausal symptoms that play a role. So classic things like vaginal atrophy, which is thinning and wasting away of tissues. So tissues become thinner and less elastic in this area, and that has an impact, you know, resulting irritation, dryness, soreness. These are all really, really common symptoms. Urinary frequency, urgency and leakage, really, really common symptoms. And obviously these impact on sexual relationships. So first of all, you know, you might want to try and think about using vaginal moisturizing lubricants, but the best treatment is easily known to be vaginal estrogen. You have to have that prescribed. It's a tiny amount of vaginal estrogen. It's not classed as being HRT. It's localized treatment, goes exactly to where it's needed. You can have it in different formats. We'll go into more detail on Friday, but it really is much the best thing to help with the physical side of it. But then with the psychological, emotional side, all these different, you know, things that are going on. So your irritability, a lack of sleep, hot flushes, night sweats, are all combined are off-putting when it comes to sexual intercourse as well. A lot of people want to know about testosterone and immediately want to start taking testosterone. Well, testosterone is not licensed in the UK for women. It can be prescribed off license, but just remember it's not a magical cure. There's lots of things that you can do through lifestyle choices, diet, exercise. You know, too much caffeine, too much alcohol impacts on that side of life as well. So simple things like that make a big difference. And testosterone has side effects. It interacts with other medication, and so it doesn't suit everybody.
Thank you. Our next question.
Sorry.
Oh, yep.
I was just thinking, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's an open discussion here. I was just thinking, as a non-heterosexual man, that means gay, in other words, I would like to think that sex also doesn't necessarily mean you have to have penetrative sex. There are other ways around intimacy and coming to sexual gratification and arousal and all of those things. It doesn't always have to be penetrative sex. So it's, I guess, Ruth, is what you say, have a talk with each other, know what you want and what feels good as well at that time.
Yeah, excellent point. Yeah, definitely other areas to explore.
Thank you, Calvin. What can we do to achieve more robust health and safety in the workplace? That's essential, particularly with the menopause included in workplace health and well-being policies. Bill, are you happy for me to come to you?
What more can we do? Well, I suppose get them included in the first place. Now, I know there's been a real push, and I assume that our universities, you've got a policy, we've got a policy. I assume that's happening across the sector. I don't know how broadly it's happening in the private sector. Maybe Ruth would know. We had I guess a number of champions for it, but the champions, again, in the context of this happening again through society much more, that it's coming, I guess it's being prioritized more. Would that be right, Ruth? I mean, I'm what happened to Brunel, I suppose I saw it in a bit of a vacuum because that's what my focus was, but I think there's more discussions going on and throughout society, isn't there?
Absolutely, Bill. Yeah, no, completely agree with you. Many more conversations throughout. Yeah, I mean, I started, educating on the menopause many years ago, and now with all the raised awareness, so many more conversations, so many more organisations open to having those conversations as well, and including it right across the private, public, third sectors. Yeah, everybody's taking it on board most definitely. Yeah.
Thank you. Thomas, is there an example menopause policy which can be shared? Just found out that we have one. Ruth, do you know anyone that's sharing kind of like a best practice one?
Yeah, good. I mean, I've got a basic one, but the people to get in touch with on that front are definitely Handpicked Menopause in the Workplace. They are very experienced on that front. Yes, I know you're going to have conversations with them, so they're definitely people to get hold of on that front.
Perfect. I will all of the links that were on Ruth's presentation, I will share in a follow-up email to this event when I share the recordings with you. Our next question, there's some questions focusing around kind of concentration. So what help do you suggest for struggling to keep up with what is being said on webinars and meetings? My brain cannot keep up with what's being said, and I'm sure I won't be alone. And a follow-up comment to that is I imagine that within an academic career setting, the psychological impact of losing short-term memory and concentration could feel both terrifying and crippling. I've never thought about the non-physical impact of the menopause / perimenopause before. Lack of concentration and attention it's a common theme.
Oh, very common, hugely common. And I think can be sometimes some of the first symptoms to creep in when people don't realise, but it has a huge impact on within the workplace. And it's this sense of control. I think, you feel completely out of control. Nobody chooses to be menopausal, basically. It's not, and you can't choose how quickly your estrogen levels are going to decline. You can't choose which symptoms you're going to experience. So it's that element of control that you lose, which can be the most frustrating. But just poor memory, not being able to remember people's names that you've worked with for the last 10 years, trying to pluck words, out of the sky almost. I mean, my computer once was absolutely rife with sticky labels when I was at the height of the perimenopause, just trying to remember things. And it just takes something just to trigger that memory. But it's knowing what can help those sort of things, though, that really make a difference. So you're not going to cure having loss of memory and lack of concentration. You have to go with the flow. But there's certain elements of things like, reducing your stress levels, that can definitely help. So you're helping to rebalance those hormones a little bit more. So that's why CBT comes into play there. But just learning simple, natural methods can be something that you can control yourself, can be really reassuring.
Thank you. Bill, Calvin, Tony, I mean, you're all academics, joining out fellow academics on the call. That would be surely terrifying as an academic to go through.
Absolutely. I mean, I think Ruth hit upon a point there that struck me. It was one of those areas where something that would help colleagues going through the menopause would also probably help everyone else. It was particularly around stress and complexity as an organisation. Like any big organisation, there's always lots going on. It can be quite difficult to keep up with things that are going on. And quite aside from whether or not you're experiencing any impairment in your ability to be able to remember or kind of organise and so on, the more we can do organisationally to reduce those sorts of stresses and pressures is good for everyone. And of course, there are lots of other, things like you're experiencing mental health issues, living with various chronic health conditions, chronic pain. All of those things can also impact on memory and things like that. So yeah, thinking about organisationally what we can do to almost try to make things as clear as possible and to eliminate stress where we can organisationally is going to go some way to help. And then some colleagues may need to have those sticky notes and use those other sorts of techniques. But yeah, that really struck me as an important point that Ruth was alluding to.
Thank you. We'll move on to our next question. Not just a bit of banter. How can men show allyship when other men make jokes at menopausal women's expense, particularly at work? We held an event a couple of years ago looking at casual sexism and misogyny, banter or repression. How much of that plays into impeding male allyship?
Can I have a go at that?
Yeah, of course.
I have to admit, I mean, I haven't really thought about it that much before, but, I suppose really organizations, and by organizations, I mean people in the organizations are becoming much more, having a much more nuanced understanding of all of this kind of thing. And I don't mean in the context of menopause specifically, but just generally around how damaging banter can be, and how one needs to understand that what you find funny, any number of people may not find funny, and that there's, in a professional environment with all sorts of different individuals, probably banter is not the right environment. That's not the right environment for banter. That's not to say that one can't be amusing and friendly and sort of funny, but banter has banter generally is aimed at someone or at a group, or with banter there's generally a kind of victim, if you like, and I think that's where it's very, very easy to cross the line. So just don't do it, really.
Yep.
Don't do it.
Absolutely. Ruth, are you happy to come in there?
Yep, sorry. Just completely agree, Bill. Just don't do it. It's not appropriate. It doesn't help anybody. It's people who are bantering, particularly as we're talking about the menopause, they just need to be more educated, don't they, and understand it a little bit more. But not appropriate in any situation.
Thank you,
Neil. Can I
Calvin?
just say?
Yeah, of course.
I think Tony touched. Not Tony. Sorry. Bill touched on a really important topic there about banter. I was giving a talk yesterday at Bradford University, being the anniversary of George Floyd's death. And I was talking about banter and racism, but one of the points I was trying to talk about was racial harassment and bullying. And in its own right, when banter like that is repeated, it becomes bullying. So even if you are trying to be an ally to women and understand these things, and someone keeps telling you something, they're actually bullying you. So we have to be very clear, as Bill and Ruth said, just don't do it. There's no place for it.
And I guess pull it up when you see it, which I know isn't always difficult. But we recently had an active bystander intervention training, and just kind of like looking at skills for kind of stopping it from happening.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Before we hand over to Tony for closing, I would like to just offer all of our panel the opportunity to share some last final words with our audience who are with us today. These can be inspirational, practical, whatever you choose. Ruth, we'll start with you.
Okay, well, thank you very much for having me on today, to be given a chance to chat on this topic, which is very close to my heart. I just think the more people that know about it, whether you're a man, whatever gender you are, whatever age you are, you need to be educated. You know, if we can educate, I often say to my children who are completely bored by my chats that they need to be educated on all sorts of different topics, not just the menopause, but on the lifestyle choices and dialogues, all these sorts of things. Just that the more informed you can become, the better you can help people, definitely.
Thank you. Calvin?
Thank you, Neil. Well, first of all, thank you all for having me and inviting me. I think my thoughts are very similar to educate yourself. It's not difficult to become an ally, as I said. Stand up for what you believe in, and as I said, normalize the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Calvin. And Bill?
Yeah, much the same. Be open. You know, it's amazing, really. These are natural processes. As I say, 51% of the population go through them, and yet we find it so difficult to talk about. For all the men on the call, I'm 62. I've got news for you if you don't already know. I mean, Ruth did mention the pelvic floor. It does go. It does make it difficult to always reach the loo. But it was a kind of revelation to me when I started experiencing that. And again, it's something that we need to educate ourselves about. But I don't want to distract from our topic today. It's just, be open and get the knowledge that you need to be supportive.
Thank you. A huge thank you to all of you. Thank you to our audience for all of your questions. Ruth will be joining us for our men only session. Men and the Menopause, all your questions answered on Friday, and I've popped the link in the chat box. This recording will be shared with you all post-event, and that's all from me. I'd like to hand over to Tony for closing. Thank you, everyone.
Wonderful. Thanks very much, Neil, and thanks to you, Neil, for organising the whole session, and to our panellists and speakers for what certainly for me, and I think for others from looking at the chat, has been a really interesting, inspirational and thought-provoking event. And I think that our colleagues kind of summed up well the importance of education, and just trying to sort of educate yourself about things where you think you might have a bit of a blind spot. And I've certainly learned a few things here today myself. Normalization, as Calvin spoke about, sort of making it okay to talk about these sorts of things. We know that's important in many different areas. But something that really resonated with me from Bill's talk was the kind of the personal reflection about kind of what in my mind sort of aggregated together with this idea of sort of being an imperfect ally, this idea that being an ally isn't about being perfect and having all of the answers. And of course, in our lives, we've all got our own difficulties and so on. And of course, as an ally, sometimes you may say or do the wrong thing. And I was reflecting on my own personal experience of a partner that lives with a chronic health condition. I try to be supportive, but frankly, sometimes I'm not. And sometimes, because I've got my own stuff going on, I say or do the wrong thing, or and end up apologising for it later because I just wasn't in the right space to be helpful. And I think we need to sort of afford that same understanding to ourselves in a workplace environment as we may do in our personal relationships. That it's about being there and not necessarily always having the right answers, but also recognizing that sometimes you will say the wrong thing, you will put your foot in it clumsily, as one of our attendees put into the chat, and that's okay. It's about the intent and about recognizing that and trying to make up for it. But I'll certainly go away from today's event and talk to other colleagues about it, and if there are more opportunities for these sorts of discussions, certainly encourage colleagues to engage, because I think these sorts of sessions are absolutely a really powerful way of getting these messages across and getting us all thinking. So thanks everyone for your contributions. It's been great to meet you all.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.